Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And on the front end today, I have a programming note. Obviously, for those of you who are caught up right now, we are at a pivot point in our whole journey, our whole process together. We're about to wrap up the book of Matthew. In fact, today, we will look at the last little bit of text that remains in the book of Matthew. And I think I'll just give it the last word as we get to the end of our conversation today, because I think it has a lot to say for itself, and I just kind of want to let it ring in your ears and let you think about that. However, we still have some stuff to tackle involving Matthew in general. So there are 5 more episodes that are still coming. This is episode 0795. We're going to run it all the way up to episode 0800. That's in part because I like symmetry, but in part because I just genuinely have a few more things that I want to do. What are those things? One, I want to take a few episodes to look at what happens next. How did things work out for Matthew? How did things work out for Peter? What happened to that poor guy? He was crying last time we saw him. How did things work out for this monumental, seemingly impossible task that the disciples are being dealt? I mean, for crying out loud, they got Jesus right there and they're doubting and they're afraid. They're understandably intimidated. They're being told, like, just go change the whole world. They don't know how to do that. That's a super hard, but what would you do? Go change the whole world, and you're not even allowed to kill anybody or stab anybody? I mean, this is going to be super hard. There's a gigantic question here that we take for granted, and that is how? What will be the mechanism for making this new family of faith, for doing this kingdom thing? How's that supposed to happen? So we're going to look at that. We're going to look back to see how some of the stuff that we saw in Matthew earlier pays off in how things unfold in the early church, and then what happens with some of these characters and where they end up as well. The other thing that we need to cover in these 5 remaining episodes that I'm just going to release over the next couple of days. They're not going to come out like we normally do Monday through Friday because we don't have enough weekdays left. So they're just going to happen here over the weekend. Just grab them whenever you're able to. Probably the last episode, episode 800, we're just going to try to step back and be like, all right, what did we just read? What was this? What was Matthew going for? Was it successful? What were the big themes that he was trying to emphasize and get us to think about? What did we come away with regarding those big themes? And I think at the most basic level, we just need to examine the thing he's trying to convince you of. Look, it's very obvious now looking back on Matthew. He's trying to get the reader, either the original audience or now, both ways, to look at this and be like, yep, I'm convinced. Sure enough, Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God, God in the flesh. He is the eternal King who is promised. He is the one who can fix the problems of humanity's sin, death, separation from God, all of those things. And the invitation is just sitting there, flapping in the wind right in front of me to become a citizen of that kingdom and become a son, daughter, child, heir, agent of the king, or I guess to not. As soon as we're done with the last line we need to look at today, Matthew will have made his case, and I guess then we just think about what we do with it. And part of the beauty of this medium and where we have been together and where we are right now is that it doesn't have to be the same. We're in different places. It's not a simple linear thing to wrestle with the big questions. To wrestle with the biggest question. What do we do with the maker and our relationship, our right standing, our orientation toward that maker? What posture do we assume before the maker? That's a big one. What a ride. And I go all the way back to the beginning of Matthew, and what I see is just a bunch of names, right? It opens with a genealogy. And that genealogy, it's really easy to skip over when you first encounter the book of Matthew because you're like, I've heard of some of these people. I haven't heard of others. Like, get to the action, get to the part where the story happens, the baby's born, and the Herod goes crazy, and the Magi show up with presents. Like, that stuff's interesting. But as you and I have seen, that genealogy, just its existence and the fact that it has the names on it that it has on it, associated with the stories that it's associated with, it's told a story that has set a tone for all of the book of Matthew. Now, we've talked a lot in the home stretch about how Matthew bookends things. He doesn't start a theme and then not end a theme. One of the themes that we get from looking at that list of names that walks us through hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years of history is if you look at that for what it is, you should come away with a sense of God's providence. The assertion here from Matthew, the thesis is, the story didn't just happen. God ordained this story. God saw this story through from beginning to end. And therefore, you can kind of picture Matthew making a little circle with his finger, like, therefore, well, I think the reader is supposed to look at that and think, are you saying, Matthew, that he is continuing to superintend the story you're about to give us? Yeah, that is what I'm saying. The same God who saw all of that through, who is managing all of history, who has that kind of power and authority, is overseeing everything that's going to happen in the book of Matthew, and, it stands to reason, is going to oversee everything that happens next. And that means that the opening thought of the book of Matthew is look at God's providence and presence in the middle of everything, always there, all these crazy stories, all this apparent chaos. It all looks like an untended field that, well, we got to get in there and fix history and fix all these things. It looks like it's untended, but it's tended. Matthew is telling his readers, God has been with us. God has been with humanity through all of it. And then he closes the book of Matthew in the neatest little bookend, saying the exact same thing. Jesus says in Matthew 28, verse 16, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. We went through the whole book of Matthew and we looked at how thick that theme was and how it's being paid off right here. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. Go tell people about this. Give away the thing you have been given and play your role in making a new family of faith. As you were once outsiders, but then someone came along and reached into your life, even though you didn't deserve it, to make you sit at the table, to make you an insider, to make you part of the family of faith. Go give away what you've been given. Go do that for others. Be fishers of men. And we looked at that theme. Then we looked at this gift, this visual, this image, this potent thing that is the gift of baptism. And in a way, with the gift of baptism, there's an aspect of confessing back to God what God has confessed to us, to use Lutheran language, that the God specifically we are baptizing in the name of is a triune God, Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. It's a mystery. It's difficult to understand, but this is the God who's been superintending all of this history. And this is the God who is at the head of this new family of faith, all of creation, and indeed this entire redemptive plan that we've been learning about. So we got the authority thing. We got the new family of faith. Give away what you've been given. Go tell people theme. We've got the when you do, and they respond the same way Peter responded to what God did in his life back in chapter 16. Then you've got this thing that is a marker, an indicator, a rite of passage, a sacrament, a way of conveying the grace of God that marks that kingdom citizen, that new child, daughter, heir, agent of the kingdom, that marks them as being just that, not an outsider. I think it's pretty clear from Matthew that the salvation work is done at the cross, that Jesus is responsible for that. I don't read here in the text that just the simple act of baptism in and of itself has anything to do with changing the destiny of a person, but it is certainly a God-ordained marker in which each time we do it, we are repeating exactly which God, the one true God, exactly whose family this person, this kingdom citizen, is being baptized into. So that's what we've seen so far. And then we get verse 20, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. Well, what all has he commanded? I mean, a lot of stuff, but what we see is this law of love. What we see is this fulfillment of the rules of the Old Testament. There are multiple kinds of levels of the law that we've talked about. Civil law, sacrificial law, ceremonial law, the clean and unclean stuff, the moral law between parties. We looked at all of those different things really early on in the book of Matthew, and all of that is fulfilled in the kingdom values and in the work of Christ, but he has spelled things out in terms of how you respond to people in the world, how you live out the values of the kingdom. And given what we see in the rest of the New Testament, I think we have to understand obeying everything I have commanded you as also including responding to God on his terms, assuming that right posture before the king. That is obedience to the command. Acknowledging that he is in fact king, that he is in fact who he says he is, even though, of course, our human acknowledgement of that will always be flawed, imperfect, clumsy, ham-fisted. Maybe we'll try to make it not clumsy and ham-fisted by being super intellectual and smart, in which case it will be too rigid for its own good. Like, we can't fully contain the kind of knowledge that we're talking about here, but we can, again, to use that Lutheran language, confess back to God what God has confessed to us, what Jesus has revealed about himself and about his Father, what God has revealed, what the Holy Spirit, as we go on in the Bible, is going to reveal. All of that stuff, I mean, it's part of what Jesus is saying he has commanded. And so the idea is try to understand it and try to respond to God on his own terms in that regard. Given what we've seen in Matthew, I think that's a fair understanding of what he is saying. And a very important note, in keeping with the theme I've introduced through this whole podcast, this is not me saying that you need to do that. The few times in this document where we do run into a command where it's like, I'm Jesus and this is what you need to do. This is how the things are. I always try to make it really clear. That's not me saying that because I don't know. I don't know and I don't do. I got problems. So it's the internet and we are fellow journeyers here. And what I am doing right now is relaying to you what is probably the most forceful command of Christ in all of Matthew. Yet, much like he said earlier on, it feels light. It doesn't feel like some kind of miserable burden or oppression. It feels like a gift. Well, then finally we get back to the thing that I was saying at the beginning. The book ends. The very beginning of the book, you get this genealogy that really is just first century Jewish language for, here's a reminder of the whole story. God superintended it all. He's been with us all along, whether you knew it or not. God didn't give up on humanity. He instituted a redemptive plan, and despite our best efforts to ruin it and do stupid stuff because of our flawed human nature and our bloodlust and everything else that's wrong with us, God persisted. He was long-suffering. He built out his redemptive plan. He communicated his redemptive plan. He's carried through his redemptive plan. And there at the beginning of Matthew, the intonation is, and now you're about to see the highlight, the culmination, the centerpiece of that redemptive plan. And whoever you are, it's for you. God is indeed with us. And then that's the way the book rounds out, right here as well. Whoever you are, wherever you are, we probably haven't met. I've met a few of you. Whatever you look like, whatever you sound like, whether you're somebody who imagines that the whole God, Jesus kingdom thing is for you or not, whether you're somebody who was deep into this stuff and then it just got weird and broke, or maybe there was no big dramatic event, you just got bored and kind of spaced off and went and did other things. Whoever you are, God has written this story and he's persisted through the whole thing, and you are invited to this family of faith. You are invited to these beautiful values that everybody wants, regardless of the way our weird politics clutter it up. This invitation to the truest, realist thing, you're meant to get to the book of Matthew and be like, I need to do something with that because I think I'm invited, aren't I? Yes. Yeah, I think you are. And this is the last thing Jesus says in Matthew to people who are part of that new family of faith, to people who are sons, daughters, heirs, agents, citizens of this kingdom. He says, and surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age.